Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all to the last in the series of virtual events on digital transformation. This session today will be on CSI and the power of personalization and extending the application to do new and different things, what we call last mile functionality. Today, delivering this presentation, we have Kurt Colhoun, who's going to be walking us through some powerful features and functionality within CSI and Mongoose. So without any further ado, Kurt, it's all yours.
All right, thank you very much, Dan, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So I've been working with CSI Syteline for a little over 20 years, so I've been around for a while. I do have more of a technical background. However, today I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to personalize, how to extend, as well as add capabilities to your existing system to better support you and your business. So looking at the agenda here today, we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about the Mongoose framework and IDOs. Let's talk about what that is and what that means. Where, of course, we're going to talk about how to personalize forms. We're going to talk about the workflow wizard and the smart URLs, which are a couple of nice features in CSI and Syteline. We're also going to talk about the new data maintenance wizard, which is a really handy wizard to be able to extend your application to provide additional functionality. It allows you to create tables and IDOs and forms all in one shot. So a real cool feature. And then we're going to do a demo where I'm going to show you CSI 10, and I'm going to walk you through some of the tips and tricks for how to personalize forms. We're also going to take a look at the workflow wizard and the new data maintenance wizard as well. So let's get into it. So what is Mongoose Framework? So Mongoose Framework is essentially what you see when you log into CSI Syteline. Syteline is built on top of Mongoose. Mongoose is the application framework that provides the extensibility, the flexibility, and also provides security of your data as well. Mongoose has a very rich user interface. It has built-in web support, meaning that you can launch CSI or Syteline from a web browser. Also has mobile support as well, meaning that you can use your phone or your tablet to access the application. There's also ways to customize or change the form design within CSI to have the ability to make your form mobile friendly or have it specifically scaled to specific mobile devices. Just a little bit about IDOs. IDOs stand for the Intelligent Data Objects, and they're the middleman between the application and the database. So they're used to send and receive data in between the two systems. They also provide security as well, right? So you never have access to the database layer. IDOs are important. So I'm going to mention IDO properties a few times throughout the presentation. IDO properties are essentially your fields within the tables in the database, right? So whenever you create changes or make changes to your forms, quite often you have to reference an IDO property. And that's going to be a field or a piece of data within your system. So it's pretty important to understand from a high level what IDOs and what IDO properties are. So here's a couple of screenshots I have. So when you go to personalize a form, you need to know your scope in terms of when you're modifying it. There's a few different scopes. There's actually 4 scopes built into CSI. There's a user scope, a group, site default, and vendor default. So when you launch a form for the very first time, you're going to be seeing the vendor default version of the form. When you modify a form, you can modify it for user, for group, or for a site default. What this means is you can have different versions of the same form for different types of users. So let's say you have a sales group, maybe an accounting group that you would want to have the look and feel of a form or a couple of forms slightly different. Maybe their processes are different, or maybe you have some additional fields that you may want one group of users to have, but not another. So it's important to know that when you modify a form, you can have different versions of that form. A real cool feature that's also important to understand kind of what's happening as well. And the screenshot on the right is the toolbox. So once you get into the edit mode, These are all of the components that are available to you when modifying or making changes to a form. We're going to look at a few of these in the demo, but you can create, buttons and text boxes and drop-down boxes and gauges and graphs. Again, we're going to look at some of these in just a few minutes. So here is a screenshot of a customer's form that I've modified. So I've created a few personalizations that I'm going to walk you through each of these in just a few minutes in the demo. The first one, probably the most obvious, is the color, the gradient on the customer name. So as you can see, we have a two-tone color that's very easy to add. It's also important to note that this can be conditional as well, right? Meaning that you can have this color appear only under certain conditions. One good example might be if you have a customer that's on credit hold, right? You may want to make this bright red, right? Just to make it more visible and more obvious for the end user to know that we may want to, spend a bit more detail and look at this a little closer, right? So with the color changing as well as several other changes on the form, you can have conditional rules. So it's important to be aware of that. The second change I made is to add a custom field to the form. So, every business may have, pieces of data or components that may not be available out of the box in CSI. So this is a very easy way to extend the form and add additional fields and components to that form. So what I've done is I've created a custom field called external account number that may be appropriate for some businesses. And this is where we simply add the objects over to the form and we bind it to a custom field. So I'm going to show you how I did that in just a few minutes. The third thing I'm going to talk about is a button here that launches a web browser and that launches the Google Maps web page and that passes in the address parameters automatically. So, if you want to have a real quick way to view the address in the map interface, you could create this button and then it's going to basically extend the application to external tools, in this case, a web browser. This is a very simple example. You can use this for really anything you want, right? And another example might be on the items form. You may have a drawing, right? And you may have to open that drawing using a certain CAD program, right? So you can have, a button on the items form that says open drawing, and it could go and launch an external program and open the drawing for you. So just a couple examples of how you can utilize this feature. The fourth change I made here is to add a critical number or a KPI to the customer's form. In this case, it's open orders by customer. This is filtered by customer numbers. So when you, go from one customer to another, the data will change automatically. This is also drill down capable as well. So if you click on it, it's going to drill down into the details of this critical number. So a pretty handy way and a pretty easy way of extending the functionality of a form. And finally, we have a button on the right here called Customer Complaints. This is part of the QCS quality module. And there is a lot of similarities and there's a big benefit to being able to link to this customer complaints form directly from customers. Now, because that's not available out of the box, it's very easy to add this button in. So this is going to pass in the customer number as the parameter to the customer complaints form, making it much quicker to access that data and saving quite a few clicks as well, rather than trying to open it yourself. And again, I'm going to show you how all these changes were made in just a few minutes. The next thing I want to talk about is the workflow wizard. This is connected to the application event system, which is used to handle, anything from email notifications to full-blown approval workflows as well. Also handles escalations. The wizard is a very easy way of creating event notifications that we can use to trigger things like, if a new customer was added, or maybe if a new customer was put on credit hold. And the screenshot I have here, if a customer has a credit limit, that exceeds $25,000. So again, a real easy way of extending the system to provide automated notifications. And again, I'm going to show you how that works in the demo. Now we have smart URLs. So this is a way to have shortcuts or links to specific forms and specific data sets within CSI. Now, because CSI is web enabled, right, it's going to run in a web browser. So this is essentially a URL that we can use to pass in parameters to the application automatically. Now, it may look a little bit daunting, but it's actually pretty simple. There's a few components to this URL. So we have the server URL, which is basically the host name, right, of your CSI application server. We have the form name here. In this case, I'm launching the customer's form, but we can launch any form we like. And we have our filter parameter, right? So this is how we're filtering on a specific IDO property, in this case, custom or the customer number. And finally, we have a refresh command. So this simply tells CSI to perform a refresh. So you wouldn't have to click on refresh yourself. So pretty simple. So you can easily construct your own versions of these URLs, and you can set them up with shortcuts or send them to other users. And this is going to provide an easier way for them to link to a specific record in CSI, rather than them having to log in, open a form, filter on the data manually, right? So it's a big time saver if it makes sense in your organization. And finally, we have the new data maintenance wizard. As I mentioned earlier, this is what I like to call a one-stop shop for really building almost a custom application within CSI. It's going to create SQL tables, columns, and IDO, again, which is the middleman between the application and the database. And it's going to create a form as well, all on one shot, right? So it's within a couple of minutes, you're going to have a custom solution here. The screenshot I have, and this screenshot the example I'm going to provide in the demo is an ESS webinar attendees solution, which is going to be a custom table and form for recording the attendees from this webinar. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so let's move on to the demo. I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to look at a CSI 10 environment. Okay, so I do have the customer's form open. This is, again, CSI 10. The first thing I want to talk about when you open a form is the scope, right, or the version of a form that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So if you click on help about this form, it's going to tell you what version this is. So I have a user version for the SA user. So that means that because I'm logged in as SA, this is the form I see. If another user logs in, they're probably going to see a different version, maybe the site default version of the form. So when you're making personalizations, it's important to know what context or what scope you're making those changes to. It may make sense to do a site default version so all users will see these changes, or it may make sense to do a user version if only one or two users would like to see these changes. Okay, so to get into the edit mode, we simply click on the design button, which is a paintbrush here on the menu bar. And this is our scope, right? So we can do user, group, or site default. I'm going to go ahead and select user and click OK. Now this is going to open the form into our edit mode. We're going to see a list of components on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we're going to see the properties of each component or field on the form. So what we're going to do now is we're going to walk through each of the 5 personalizations I made to this form, and I'm going to show you how I made those changes. So the first one is the color mapping, the color gradient on the customer name field. And this is quite simple. So you click on appearance, you click on background color, and this is where we specify a gradient color type. And this is where we specify our first color red, our second color black, and we can choose the direction of the gradient as well. Pretty simple. You can apply this to any field you would like on any form. And as I mentioned before, you can also add conditional formatting to this too, meaning that if you want this color to only appear under certain circumstances, say if the customer is on credit hold, that's something you can do with the changes to the form as well. Okay, the second change I made here was the custom field, right? So this is a great way of adding additional data to a form quite easily. So what I did to make this work is we basically have an edit object here, which is a text box, but it's called edits on the component list, and you would simply drag that over. And we have the label as well, which is called a static. So we would take a static component and drag that over to the form. We would simply use the caption over here to the right to enter the label identifier. And for the text box, we would have to bind it to our custom field, right? And to bind any field to a property, we would choose the data source option on the right, and we would click on the binding tab here. So this is basically a list of all of the IDO properties, right, within the collection. This UF customer external accounts field is a custom field I added using the user extended tables functionality. So again, you can choose any field you like to bind to this object, and this basically allows you to have an extra field to store information, right? So a great way of easily adding additional functionality to existing forms. Okay, the third thing I'm going to show you is this button here to launch the Google Maps webpage. Pretty simple. So again, we have the events button here. We're going to click on primary, and this is going to be the primary event. So this is going to be what happens when you click on that button. As you can see, the response type is set to go to URL. So that tells CSI to launch your default web browser and to pass in this parameter, right? Now, this is where the trick is. On this parameter here, we're actually passing in IDO properties or fields in the search string, right? So we're telling Google to open up this web page and to search for this information. So P stands for property. So this will be an IDO property for address line 1. And we're also passing the city, and we're also passing the country as well. So when we send this to the Google Maps webpage, you're going to see that this is going to be translated to the address information we have on the customer record. So let me quickly show you what that looks like. If I exit out of the edit mode, and if I click on the record here, this is just a Vancouver address. If we click on the Google Maps button, it's going to open a web browser for us. As you can see, the search string has been updated with the address on the customer record, right? So again, a real easy and quick way to extend the application to external systems, in this case to a web browser, right? Pretty easy, and really you can use this, as I mentioned before, you can use this for several different types of solutions, right? This is a quick and easy one, but it hopefully shows you the power of how to extend to external applications. So the next thing I want to show you is the gauge, is the KPI or critical number. This is something that we can add via the gauge components over here on the left. So we would simply drag that over. Okay, and then we would go back to our data source option under binding. If we click on the little eclipse button here to the right, we have to bind it to a gauge type, right? Now, as soon as we do that and we click on edit, now we have some properties to define that gauge, right? So this is our gauge type. This is what the graph for gauge should look like. And this is where we define what the critical number is. So in this case, we're linking to the open orders by customer critical number. And the last thing I'll show you is the customer field over here to the right. This is our input parameter. So this is what we send into the critical number to have it refresh the data based on the customer record that we are looking at, right? So for example, if I were to exit edit mode again and look at the KPI, we have 5 open orders for customer number 2. If we click on customer number 1, we now have 9. As I mentioned before, this is also drill down capable as well. So we can drill into this and view the data that is made up of this number. So Again, an easy way to add more of a visual view of your data within these forms as well. Last thing I'm going to show you is the customer complaints button here in terms of how I was able to add this in. Again, it's a button component over here to the left. We would simply drag that over and we would define the primary event, just like we did for the Google Maps button. We do have a run customer complaint primary event. So if we go into the properties, the response type is set as run form as linked child. So what that means is it's going to open the QC customer complaints form, but it's going to be linked to the customer's form. And we're going to pass in the customer number parameter, right? So when I open customer complaints, it's going to be linked to whatever customer number we're looking at on customer's form, right? And that's pretty simple to do. So all I do here is go into the properties and choose a form, right? In this case, it's called QC customer complaints. And we choose our links, right? So our source is going to be customer number on the customer's form, and our target is going to be customer number on the customer complaints form. Pretty simple. So if I go and quickly show you what that looks like, we're going to have customer one on the customer's form. We're going to click on customer complaints. This is simply going to pass customer one into the customer complaints form. As you can see, we're looking at all customer complaint records tied to customer number one. Again, an easy way to add additional functionality to really create efficiencies, right? And save time and save clicks for users looking to access information that may be related to the data you're looking at. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is the workflow wizard and how that works. The workflow wizard is available on most forms via the actions menu option up top. So if we click on actions, new workflow, this is where we can define a notification workflow. So this is a pretty simple way of creating an email. So the example we're going to do here is we're going to create a notification that's going to alert us if a customer's credit limit has exceeded $100,000, right? So we can either choose to notify me, that's going to be the person who is creating this workflow, or we can say notify you, that's going to be the person that's actually changing the data within CSI, right? And then if we want to build from scratch, this will take us into the event system where we can perform some more advanced functions. So I'm going to click on notify me. And this is where I choose my form or my IDO. It's going to default to the form I have open. So typically we would leave this alone. Then we can choose to track additions or changes or deletions. In this case, because we want to track changes to the credit limit field, I'm going to leave this as changes. And this is where we can add a filter if we like to. So if you want to filter on certain types of records, right? Only fire the workflow, maybe if the customer is in a certain region or a certain country, or maybe based on the salesperson, right? Only fire the trigger under certain events or certain data types. In this case, I want to look at all customers because I don't care what the customer type is. If they've exceeded the credit limit based on the value I have specified, then I want to be notified of it, right? So we're going to click on next. And this is our condition, right? So this is where we're going to say where the credit limit exceeds a certain value, right? So this is our list of IDO properties here. Now I happen to know the credit limit is the name of the IDO property that I want to use. So we're going to click on that. And we have some options here for the condition as well. So what I'm going to choose is I'm going to choose increases to or exceeds. I'm going to enter $100,000 as the value, right? I'm going to click on add this clause. So what this is going to do is this is basically going to notify me anytime a customer record changes where the credit limit is $100,000 or more. Right? And that's all there is to it. We click on finish, and this will create a workflow for us. And basically, the next time that a user goes in and changes the credit limit for any customer, This workflow is going to fire. It's going to evaluate the condition. If the condition is true, meaning if the credit limit is over $100,000, then I'm going to receive an email. That'll be my cue to go and look into it to see what's going on. Right? Pretty simple. Finally, I want to show you the new data maintenance wizard. So we have to be in design mode to launch that. So I'm going to go back into design mode. And I'm going to click on Form, Definition, New Data Maintenance. And again, this is what you can use to extend CSI to offer additional functionality. In this case, we're going to create a solution to track our ESS webinar attendees from this event, right? So all we have to do is specify a name and a few other types of data as well as our columns. And then we can go ahead and process this this wizard. So we're going to enter a name here. So bear with me while I fill in a few details. So we're going to enter the name of this solution. I'm going to call this ESS webinar attendees. We're going to choose a project. This is basically how we can group our custom projects. I'm going to choose ESS custom. Our form type is multi-view, so that's where you have the grids over to the left and the form view over to the right. So I'm going to leave that as default. The device type is default. If you want to create a mobile version of this form, you can change it to mobile. I'll enter an alias here of a table name, and site split is if you're multi-site. If you're multi-site, then you need to create a master table as well as a view. Now, because this demo database I'm logged into is multi-site, I'm going to go ahead and check that box. Now we have an option to create the form, right? So we definitely want to do that, right? We want to have a form created for us that we can use to input this data into this new table, right? And we're going to add a few new columns to the table, right? So we're going to enter ID. We always need a primary identifier of all tables. I'm just going to enter an integer type here. We're going to make a primary key. And now we're going to enter a first name, and it's going to be a name property class. We're going to enter last name and email. Let's add one more. That's going to be customer number. So if you happen to know what the customer number is of the contact, then you can go ahead and fill that in as well. And that's all there is to it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on next. And if you have a templates database, if you're creating many of these solutions, then you may have a templates database, but I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that. If you want to create a script to batch this and launch this later, maybe in a different environment, you can do that. I'm going to go ahead and click on finish. And that's really as simple as it is. So what this is doing is this is creating our database table and columns. It's creating our IDO, which again is our middleman between the application and the database. And that's also creating our form, right? So now it's just giving us a warning that the SQL tables form is opening. We're going to click on close. Now we can actually browse around and look at some of these changes. So the IDO was created called ESS Webinar Attendees. We have a new table, right? And we have some properties, right? Or columns that have been added as well. Okay, the SQL tables form opened for us automatically. This is basically the table, the SQL table that was created, as well as all of the SQL columns that were created as well. These are some default columns as well as the columns we've specified. Okay. And we have our form, right? So this is the form that was created automatically as part of the wizard. Now, as you can see, we would need to make a few changes to this form, but that's really as simple as going into the design mode. I will select my label here. I will enter a caption of ID, and maybe I want to change this to first name. Let's change this to last name. And that should do it. So no, I can easily, extend these fields if I want to, make some of them a little bit longer as well. You can usually do that too. Now, just to give this a quick test, if we enter an ID and enter first name, last name, go. And now this is kind of cool. This is the customer number field that we added. Because we chose a type of custom, it knows that this is a customer number within Syteline CSI. So this is actually going to link to our existing customers in our database, right? So a real nice and easy way to link to your existing data sets, if that makes sense, right? I can click on one more here. Let's enter one more record. And the customer number is optional. So if I want to leave that blank, if I don't know what the customer number is, I can go ahead and just leave it as is. Click on save. And now we basically have a grid view over here to the left, so we can use this to export this to Excel, or we could also use this to import data from a CSV file as well. If you do have an Excel spreadsheet, you can use that to input the data into this form. So that's it. So a real quick and easy way, as you can see, of creating custom solutions and custom tables and forms all within a single wizard. So with that ends my demo, and I'll pass it back to you, Dan.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Kurt. I want to thank everybody for your time today. It was a great informative demo on how you can really extend and enhance the functionality of CSI Syteline, using the Mongoose platform. Good job, Kurt. Thank you very much. Everybody have a great day.